The 1960s gave us some legends on two wheels, sleek café racers, snarling scramblers, and machines that defined an era. But let's be real, not everything that rolled out of a factory in the 60s was a masterpiece. Some bikes were slow, some were sketchy, and some were so bad they made riders swear off motorcycles altogether. We're talking oil leaks, brutal vibrations, mystery electrical issues, and designs that made you wonder if the engineers were actually trying. So today, we're firing up a list that nobody wanted to be on. These are the 20 worst motorcycles from the 1960s everyone hated. Let's dive in. The 1967 Harley-Davidson Sprint H was Harley's attempt to dive into the lightweight motorcycle market, a world far removed from their iconic big cruisers. And while Harley's name carried weight, this little Sprint didn't quite live up to the badge. At a glance, the Sprint H looked like a sporty European import, because it was. Harley had teamed up with Italian manufacturer Ermaci to build it, and the result way well, confusing. The bike had a horizontal single-cylinder engine that gave it a completely different profile from the V-twin beasts Harley fans were used to. Performance-wise, it wasn't terrible, packing a 250cc engine and topping out around 70 miles per hour. But the ride was anything but smooth. Vibrations rattled the frame, and handling felt twitchy, especially at higher speeds. Riders often complained about awkward ergonomics and a seat that seemed custom designed to punish your lower back. While Harley tried to market the Sprint H as a fun, nimble commuter, it never really found its place. Traditional Harley loyalists weren't interested in a small European-style bike, and younger riders were already flocking to Japanese brands offering more reliability, better performance, and sleeker designs. To make matters worse, maintenance was no joyride either. The electrical system was finicky, the kickstart could be stubborn, and parts weren't exactly easy to come by. Despite its sporty looks, the Sprint H ended up being a misfit in the Harley lineup. It wasn't bold enough for the big bike crowd, and not refined enough to compete in the lightweight category. Today, it lives on mostly as a quirky footnote in Harley history, proof that even legends can miss the mark when trying to be something they're not. Meet the 1969 Suzuki T500 Titan, a bike that tried to prove two-stroke engines weren't just for small, zippy commuters. With a 500cc twin-cylinder engine, the Titan was one of the largest capacity two-stroke motorcycles of its time. It was bold, powerful, and honestly, a bit wild. Now, to be fair, the Titan wasn't short on speed. It could hit close to 100 miles per hour, which was impressive for a two-stroke. But here's the catch. Getting there felt like wrestling a chainsaw strapped to a rocket. The throttle was twitchy, the power band came on like a slap in the face, and smooth cruising? Not this beast's strong suit. Then, there was the handling. The T500 had a reputation for feeling heavy and sluggish in corners. Its steel frame wasn't exactly performance-tuned, and combined with the engine's sudden bursts of power, it could feel unpredictable, especially for inexperienced riders. Add in a stiff suspension and drum brakes that felt more like polite suggestions, and you had a recipe for white-knuckle rides. Styling-wise, it wasn't winning any beauty contests either. It had that classic late 60s Japanese look, plain tank, chrome accents, and a frame that seemed a bit too long for its own good. Not ugly per se, but certainly forgettable. Despite all this, the T500 wasn't a total failure. It was reliable, simple to maintain, and actually developed a cult following among die-hard two-stroke fans. But for the average rider, it was too big, too rough, and too weird to really catch on. In the end, the 1969 Suzuki T500 Titan was a bold experiment, a heavy hitter in a lightweight division. It roared onto the scene with a puff of blue smoke and a whole lot of attitude. but for most riders, it was just too much to handle. The 1964 BSA Lightning rocket was Britain's attempt to go toe-to-toe with rising competition from Japan and the US. And at first glance, it had all the right ingredients. A shiny chrome tank, twin exhausts, and a 650cc parallel twin engine that promised speed, style, and serious swagger. But here's the problem. It talked the talk, but didn't quite walk the walk. On paper, the Lightning rocket was a performance upgrade to BSA's A65 series. It offered twin carburetors, a higher compression ratio, and a top speed of nearly 110 miles per hour. Sounds impressive, right? Until you actually tried to keep it running long enough to hit those numbers. The bike was notorious for reliability issues. Leaky gaskets, dodgy electrics, and vibrations that could rattle your fillings loose were all part of the experience. And don't even get started on the oil leaks. This thing marked its territory, like a wild animal. Handling wasn't exactly confidence-inspiring either. The frame felt wobbly at higher speeds, and the brakes, drum of course, required a prayer and a lot of road space to bring the bike to a stop. Riders often joked that the Lightning rocket was best enjoyed parked, where you could admire its looks without risking your life. And that's the thing. It did look good. With its polished metal, deep tank badge, and aggressive stance, it had that classic British café racer vibe. It just didn't live up to it. By the mid-60s, Japanese bikes were storming the market with better performance, better build quality, and most importantly, reliability. The Lightning rocket, despite its flashy name, started to feel like yesterday's news. In the end, the 1964 BSA Lightning rocket was more sizzle than steak. It had charm, no doubt. But charm doesn't get you home when you're stuck on the side of the road, kicking a dead ignition. Meet the 1966 Honda CA77 Dream, a motorcycle that dared to be different in a world dominated by chrome, leather jackets, and growling engines. With its swooping bodywork, enclosed fenders, and pressed steel frame, the Dream looked more like a mid-century art project than something you'd want to race down a country road. Honda marketed it as a smooth, quiet, and easy-to-ride machine for the everyday commuter. And in fairness, it was all of those things. Its 305 cubic centimeter parallel twin engine was reliable, refined, and surprisingly peppy for its size, cruising comfortably at highway speeds with minimal fuss. It even had electric start, which was a pretty big deal back then. But where it lost people was in the looks. The styling was polarizing. Some saw it as clean and futuristic. Others thought it looked like a scooter that got stretched in Photoshop. The squared-off edges, thick side panels, and large chrome mufflers gave it a bulky, awkward silhouette, especially compared to the sleek café racers and sporty scramblers of the time. And let's not forget the ride experience. The suspension was soft, and the handling felt detached, like it just wanted to go in a straight line forever. That was fine for relaxed city rides, but not exactly thrilling for the more performance-minded crowd. The Dream ended up being a bit of an oddball in Honda's otherwise stellar lineup. It sold fairly well, thanks to Honda's reputation for bulletproof engineering, but design-wise, it was never the fan favorite. Riders who wanted something cool and edgy just weren't lining up for a bike that looked like it came with a blender warranty. Today, the 1966 Honda Dream is a collectible for its quirkiness. Some love it for its retro charm and unique design. Others, they're still scratching their heads wondering who thought square fenders were a good idea. Say hello to the 1962 Velocette Viceroy, Britain's bold attempt to break into the luxury scooter market. And by bold, we mean questionable. This thing tried to be a Vespa for gentlemen, but ended up looking like a vending machine on wheels. Designed with elegance in mind, the Viceroy featured full bodywork, large side panels, and enclosed handlebars. It even had a glove box. On paper, it was supposed to be a high-end scooter that blended British engineering with Italian flair. But in reality, the result was awkward, bulky, and about as sporty as a tea trolley. Under the body, it packed a 192 cubic centimeter two-stroke twin-cylinder engine, mounted under the floorboards, of all places. That meant heat, awkward maintenance, and a center of gravity that made the ride feel, well, squishy. Top speed hovered around 60 miles per hour, but getting there was a slow, rattly affair. To be fair, the Viceroy was technically advanced for its time. It had electric start, a full windscreen, and decent weather protection. But all that tech came at a cost. It was heavy, expensive, and difficult to service. And that's kind of a deal breaker when your main competitor is the simple, nimble, and wildly popular Vespa. Sales were dismal. Even loyal Velocette fans didn't quite know what to make of it. Was it a commuter? A touring scooter? A rolling suitcase? Whatever it was, it didn't catch on, and the company quietly ended production after just a couple of years. Today, the 1962 Velocette Viceroy is a rare sight, usually found in private collections or vintage scooter rallies, where it's admired more for its weirdness than its ride quality. In the end, the Viceroy is one of those machines that tried to be everything, and ended up being remembered mostly for how strange it looked while doing it. Say hello to the 1965 Royal Enfield Continental GT, Britain's answer to the rising youth motorcycle culture of the 60s. With its sleek tank, rear-set foot pegs, drop handlebars, and bright red paint, this thing looked like it came straight from a rock and roll poster. It wanted to go fast. It looked fast, but when you actually rode it, let's just say the vibe didn't match the performance. Under the tank, the GT packed a 250cc single-cylinder engine. Not exactly a fire breather. Sure, it sounded sporty and could hit around 80 miles per hour on a good day with a tailwind and a lot of hope. But it vibrated like a washing machine on spin cycle, and long rides felt more like endurance tests than joyrides. Royal Enfield really leaned into the café racer trend here. This was one of the first factory-built café-style bikes, but where it stumbled was in execution. The build quality was hit or miss. The electrics were, well, British, and tuning it required a mechanic with both patience and wizardry. Riders back then were split. Some loved the rebellious look and the lightweight feel, while others quickly learned that style didn't always come with substance. The gearbox was clunky, starting could be stubborn, and oil leaks. Oh, it had plenty of those. It was a Royal Enfield, after all. Still, the 1965 Continental GT carved out a niche. It became something of a cult classic, not because it was the best bike on the road, but because it captured the spirit of the era. It was youthful, a bit wild, and just rough enough around the edges to feel authentic. O'Day. It's remembered with a weird mix of admiration and frustration. A bike that looked the part, but didn't always play it well. Oh yes, meet the 1961 Harley-Davidson Topper, the only scooter Harley ever built, and for good reason. If the name sounds classy, don't be fooled. This thing was more lawnmower than lowrider. At a glance, the Topper looked like someone tried to combine a golf cart with a bread box. It had a fully enclosed fiberglass body, tiny wheels, and a seat that looked more suited for a child's tricycle. You'd never guess this came from the same company that made roaring V-twins and leather-clad legends. Under the plastic body was a 165 cubic centimeter single-cylinder two-stroke engine that produced around 9 horsepower. And while Harley marketed it as a stylish urban runabout, the Topper had all sorts of problems. First off, it had a pull start. Yes, like a lawnmower. And it was famous for being finicky. One wrong pull, and you'd be sweating in front of your date while the scooter just sat there judging you. Performance? Let's just say it didn't exactly live up to the Harley name. Top speed hovered around 50 miles per hour, if you were lucky and riding downhill. Handling was sketchy, braking was mediocre, and the CVT transmission, a rarity back then, was known to jam up. And let's talk about the looks. The Topper was sleek for a fridge. It had none of the rebellious, road-hungry attitude that Harley was known for. Instead, it looked like something your grandma might have used to pick up groceries, and she probably would have been faster on foot. To make matters worse, the engine had a habit of overheating, especially since it was air-cooled, and the body design restricted airflow. Add in some clutch issues and body panels that cracked if you looked at them wrong, and you've got yourself a rolling headache. Unsurprisingly, the Topper flopped. Harley pulled the plug after a few short years, and the scooter quietly disappeared from the lineup, never to return. Today, the 1961 Harley-Davidson Topper is a rare collector's item, but more as a punchline than a prized possession. A quirky blip in Harley's history, it's remembered as the scooter that dared to dream, and then ran out of steam. If motorcycles could talk, the 1963 Jawa 259/559 Panelka would probably say, "I'm trying my best, okay?" Because this Eastern European oddball was full of effort, but not much elegance. Built in then Czechoslovakia, the Jawa Panelka was meant to be a solid, dependable motorcycle for the masses, and in a way, it kind of was. It had a 250cc two-stroke engine, a sturdy frame, and all the charm of a Soviet apartment block. Visually? Let's just say it wasn't winning any pageants. With its bulbous side panels, exposed wiring, and boxy seat, it looked like someone tried to merge a tractor with a hairdryer. The front headlamp nacelle was unusually wide, almost like it had cheeks, and not in a good way. Under the tank, things weren't much better. The engine produced about 14 horsepower, enough to get you moving, but not enough to make it exciting. Top speed? Around 65 miles per hour, if the wind was behind you and you'd skipped lunch. And don't expect a smooth ride. The Panelka had a suspension that felt like it was made of worn-out bed springs, and handling that could best be described as reluctant. Starting the bike was often a game of chance, especially in cold weather. The kickstart had a stubborn streak, and once you finally got it going, the exhaust let out a smoky wheeze like it needed a nap. But despite all this, the Jawa 25595 Rai did have a loyal fan base. In parts of Eastern Europe, it was a symbol of mobility and freedom, rugged, simple, and surprisingly durable. Just don't expect it to win any drag races or style contests. Today, the Panelka has a kind of retro charm, appreciated by collectors who love its utilitarian vibe and Cold War-era weirdness. But let's be honest, if you parked one next to a Honda or a Triumph from the same era, you'd think it wandered in from a different timeline. In short, the 1963 Jawa Panelka was a bike that got the job done, just without much finesse. A true underdog from behind the Iron Curtain, and a gentle reminder that not every motorcycle needs to be pretty to be remembered. Now here's a bike that looked like it should come with a built-in umbrella and a cup holder for your afternoon tea. Meet the 1960 Aerial Leader, a motorcycle that boldly asked, "What if we made a bike that doesn't look like a bike at all?" With its fully enclosed bodywork, integrated fairings, and matching color schemes. It looked less like a café racer and more like a two-wheeled sedan. This British oddity came with a 250cc two-stroke twin engine, tucked neatly inside its pressed steel frame. The goal? Comfort, weather protection, and a sleek, car-like aesthetic. The result? A bike that looked like it came from a Jetsons episode, but somehow ended up stuck in a rainstorm. To its credit, the Aerial Leader was innovative. It had storage compartments, optional built-in indicators, and even a windscreen. There was also an optional radio, because who doesn't want a little background jazz while dodging potholes? But looks aside, the riding experience wasn't quite as refined. The engine was underpowered, the bike was heavier than expected, and the handling felt sluggish, more suited to a Sunday cruise through the countryside than any spirited ride. And that stylish bodywork? It made maintenance a nightmare. Changing a spark plug felt like dismantling a space shuttle. And while Ariel wanted to appeal to a new class of modern motorcyclists, traditional riders didn't exactly embrace the shift. Most saw the Leader as trying too hard to be something it wasn't. And in doing so, it alienated both scooter lovers and motorcycle purists. The enclosed panels also led to ventilation issues, especially around the engine, and more than a few riders found themselves stranded on hot days with a steaming machine and no toolkit in sight. Despite its quirks, the 1960 Aerial Leader was actually admired in its day for its bold approach. It even won design awards. But history hasn't been quite as kind. Today, it's remembered more as a brave misfire, a stylish commuter bike that forgot motorcyclists like to feel the road, not be bubble-wrapped from it. Ah, Ducati, a name that whispers performance, passion, and in this case, premature disappointment. Say hello to the 1968 Ducati Scrambler 250, a bike that looked ready for dirt trails, canyon carving, and long rides into the sunset.
Ross, how you doing, gang?
But beneath the sleek Italian styling and that candy-colored tank was a machine that just didn't quite live up to its swagger. Let's start with the good. The Scrambler 250 had attitude. It featured high-mounted exhaust pipes, a tall stance, and that signature Ducati thump from its single-cylinder, bevel-driven overhead cam engine. It looked tough. It sounded like it meant business. But ride it for more than 15 minutes, and you'd find yourself making deals with your chiropractor. That 250cc engine put out around 18 to 20 horsepower, which wasn't bad for the time, but it had to be revved to the moon to get anything out of it. And when you did, it vibrated like a washing machine having a meltdown. The clutch was stiff, the kickstart was temperamental, and maintenance? Well, let's just say it came with a side of Italian mystery. The handling was decent, but not confidence-inspiring off-road, especially since it wasn't really built to take much abuse. It had more scrambler aesthetic than actual off-road capability. And for newer riders, the bike's quirks could be frustrating. If you didn't keep it tuned just right, it had a tendency to sputter, stall, or simply refuse to start, usually when you were showing it off to your friends. Still, it wasn't all bad. The 1968 Scrambler 250 had style, the kind of vintage cool you can't fake. And in Ducati's defense, it laid the groundwork for the Scrambler craze that would explode decades later. But back then, it was a bike that teased greatness and delivered a bit of a headache. Today, the Scrambler 250 is a collector's item, loved for its looks and heritage, but also remembered as a reminder that beauty and reliability don't always ride on the same wheels. Introducing the 1966 Bridgestone 350 GTR, a Japanese machine that came out swinging with advanced engineering, sleek styling, and performance numbers that raised more than a few eyebrows. while this bike had brains, it never quite won hearts. Built by Bridgestone, the same company known today for tires, not torque, the GTR was their ambitious attempt to take on the big boys like Honda and Yamaha. And on paper, it was impressive. This 345 cubic centimeter rotary valve twin-cylinder two-stroke engine churned out about 37 horsepower, which was wild for its class. Top speed? Over 100 miles per hour, and it had a 6-speed gearbox at a time when most bikes had 4 or 5. So what went wrong? For starters, the price. The GTR was expensive, almost as much as a 650cc British twin. And for that price, buyers got a small displacement two-stroke that needed premium fuel, frequent maintenance, and the mechanical understanding of a watchmaker. The GTR wasn't a hop-on-and-go bike. It was more of a high-maintenance genius with mood swings. Then, there was the sound. Instead of the deep growl or throaty rumble people expected from a performance bike, the Bridgestone let out a shrill, chainsaw-like buzz that had more in common with a racing lawnmower than a road warrior. Handling was sharp, braking was adequate, and the ride quality wasn't terrible. But even with all those checkboxes ticked, buyers just didn't trust a motorcycle from a tire company, especially when dealerships were hard to find and parts even harder. Eventually, Bridgestone pulled the plug on their motorcycle division, likely under pressure from other Japanese manufacturers who just didn't want the competition. The GTR faded into obscurity, known mostly as the what could have been of 1960s motorcycles. Today, the 1966 Bridgestone 350 GTR is a rare collector's gem, admired for its ahead-of-its-time engineering, but also remembered as a machine that outsmarted itself right off the market. Now here's a name that should command respect, but even legends have awkward teenage years. The 1965 Triumph T120 Bonneville is now seen as a British icon, sleek fast, and dripping with café racer cred. But let's rewind to those early models, when owning one was more about patience than performance. The T120 was powered by a 649cc parallel twin that put out around 46 horsepower, which was solid for the time. With a top speed pushing 110 miles per hour, it was built to thrill. And let's be honest, it looked amazing. Teardrop tank, dual carbs, twin exhausts. It had all the cool of a rock and roll poster. But under all that beauty, trouble. The early Bonnevilles were notorious for oil leaks. The phrase marking its territory became a running joke among owners. If you parked it overnight and didn't see a puddle the next morning, you probably forgot to put oil in it. And let's talk about starting it. The kickstart had a mind of its own, and getting the carbs tuned just right was like black magic. Too rich? It flooded. Too lean? It coughed. Either way, your right leg got quite the workout. Then, there was the vibration. At speed, the whole bike buzzed like a chainsaw on espresso. Mirrors blurred, hands went numb, and bolts had a habit of slowly loosening themselves, like the bike was politely trying to fall apart while you weren't looking. Handling? Decent for the time, but the frame wasn't the stiffest, and high-speed wobble was a very real thing. Combine that with the drum brakes, and you had to start planning your stops about 2 blocks in advance. Still, despite all the drama, the 65 Bonneville had soul. It was stylish, fast, when it ran, and had that raw, rebellious charm that riders craved. It just came with a few quirks, or as Triumph fans call them, character. Today, early Bonnevilles are beloved classics, but make no mistake, the 1965 T120 was a beauty queen with a bit of a bad attitude. And owning one meant knowing your way around a toolkit and maybe keeping a drip pan in your garage. Meet the 1963 NSU Quickly TT, a German-built moped that promised to get you from A to B eventually. The quickly in its name, that was optimism. The TT stood for Tourist Trophy, but honestly, this thing was better suited for mailbox runs than race circuits. Let's start with the engine. It had a 49 cubic centimeter two-stroke single cylinder, producing about 2.5 horsepower. That's right, 2.5, which meant flat-out speed was somewhere in the range of 30 to 35 miles per hour, downhill, with a tailwind and a prayer. It was more whisper than roar. But hey, it was lightweight, easy to ride, and sipped fuel like a hummingbird. In fact, it was popular in post-war Europe for exactly those reasons. Cheap, efficient, and good enough to get you to school, work, or your sweetheart's house, provided she didn't live on a hill. Now, the Quickly TT was supposed to be the sporty version of the Quickly lineup. It had a slightly sportier tank, a narrower saddle, and, if you squinted, a racing-ish stance. But sporty in this case meant less practical and slightly more bouncy. The suspension was basic, the brakes were borderline decorative, and the pedals, yes, it had bicycle-style pedals, reminded you that this was still 1 foot in the bicycle world. Starting it often involved awkward kicking or pedaling, like you were escaping a goose attack. And once it was running, you had to learn its mood, because like many vintage two-strokes, the Quickly TT could be fussy, smoky, and not entirely sure it wanted to be awake today. Despite all this, the 1963 NSU Quickly TT sold in huge numbers. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was affordable, approachable, and surprisingly well built for its size. For many, it was their first ever taste of two-wheeled freedom. Today, it's a nostalgic gem, quirky, underpowered, and absolutely charming. But let's be real, no one's chasing land speed records on a Quickly TT. If ever there was a motorcycle that sounded like it was named after a cartoon character, this would be it. Say buongiorno to the 1960 Moto Guzzi Zigolo 98, a featherweight Italian two-stroke that tried its best to be stylish, practical, and ended up somewhere between a scooter and a sewing machine. Let's start with the name, Zigolo. It means bunting, like the little bird. Cute, right? Unfortunately, it also kind of describes the way it moved, fluttery, unpredictable, and not especially fast. The Zigolo came with a 98 cubic centimeter two-stroke engine, making just about 5 horsepower. It could reach a top speed of around 45 miles per hour, eventually, if it was in the mood. The styling was classic early 60s Italy, elegant curves, slim frame, exposed engine. But somehow, it still managed to look like it was mid-transformation, between a bicycle and a moped. The seat was thin and unforgiving. The handlebars were wide, and the overall profile was just a little too tall and narrow for comfort. More swan on stilts than sleek Italian stallion. Now, Moto Guzzi was a respected name in the motorcycle world, known for their V-twins and racing pedigree. But the Zigolo 98, it was clearly meant for commuters and new riders. Simple to operate, easy to fix, and economical to run, but not exactly something you'd brag about outside the espresso bar. It had a 3-speed gearbox, minimal suspension, and brakes that worked about as well as dragging your feet. And while it was well built for a budget bike, the Zigolo still suffered from the usual two-stroke gremlins, smoky starts, temperamental performance, and that wonderful aroma of half-burnt oil. To its credit, it sold pretty well in Europe. It was cheap, practical, and reliable enough for everyday life, especially in tight Italian alleyways. But the Zigolo was never a head-turner, unless someone saw you trying to push it up a hill. Today, it lives on as a charming piece of Moto Guzzi history. Collectors love its quirky design, and retro fans appreciate its vintage flair. But make no mistake, the 1960 Zigolo 98 was more about humming along than tearing up the road. Introducing the HAR 1967 Gilera 106 SS, Italy's idea of a lightweight, stylish street machine for the post-war youth market. It had a sleek tank, chrome accents, and the SS badge, which supposedly stood for Super Sport. But let's be honest, there wasn't a whole lot of super or sport going on here. Under the tank, the 106 SS packed a modest 106cc single-cylinder four-stroke engine, producing a whopping 8 horsepower. That's right, 8. Top speed hovered around 55 miles per hour, which was decent for the era, but it didn't exactly pin you to the seat. It was more of a leisurely glide than a thrill ride. Visually, the bike looked the part. It had that classic Italian silhouette, narrow frame, upright stance, and just enough chrome to catch the sunlight. But it always seemed like it was trying a little too hard. From a distance, you might mistake it for something bigger, faster, or meaner. But once you kicked it over and hit the throttle, reality set in. Handling was light and nimble, great for city streets, but on open roads, the 106 SS felt out of its depth. It vibrated more than you'd expect for such a small engine, and the ride wasn't exactly plush. Add to that a drum brake setup that was more suggestive than stopping, and you had a bike that required some gentle anticipation every time you approached a red light. Reliability was decent, but parts weren't always easy to come by, especially outside Europe. And while Gilera had racing history to boast about, the 106 SS wasn't part of that legacy. It was more of a commuter with delusions of grandeur. Still, for many young riders in the 60s, the Gilera 106 SS was a first taste of two-wheeled freedom. Affordable, cool-looking, and just powerful enough to escape your parents' driveway. It did what it had to do. Today, the 1967 Gilera 106 SSC is a quirky collectible. Not fast, not flashy, but undeniably full of vintage charm. Just don't expect it to live up to the Super Sport name, unless your idea of speed includes a picnic break halfway there. Next on the list is a motorcycle that should have been a heavyweight hero, but ended up limping into the history books with a leaky oil tank and a reputation for being, well, a little too classic. Say hello to the high 1961 Matchless G12, a British 650cc parallel twin that came from one of the oldest names in the game. Matchless had pedigree, it had pride, but by the early 60s, it also had problems. And the G12 was a prime example of a brand trying to keep up while quietly falling apart at the seams. Let's start with the specs. The G12 had a 646 cubic centimeter engine, putting out about 35 horsepower, which wasn't bad for the time. It could reach around 100 miles per hour, and it had that deep, thumping exhaust note that made British twins sound like thunder on two wheels. But here's the twist. The engine was known for vibration. Not the feel the road kind, more like shake your fillings loose kind. Combine that with a somewhat flexy frame and primitive suspension, and the G12 didn't exactly inspire confidence at high speeds. Riders quickly learned to grip the bars tight and hope for the best. And then came the oil leaks. Like many British bikes of the era, the G12 came with a built-in drip system, whether you wanted it or not. It wasn't a question of if it leaked, but how much and from where. Most riders just carried a rag and gave up trying to fight it. The looks? Not bad. Classic British lines, a rounded tank, and chrome touches. But the styling wasn't enough to distract from the fact that this bike was quickly becoming outdated in the face of rising competition from Japan. Honda and Yamaha were pumping out lighter, faster, more reliable bikes that didn't mark your driveway, like a used Triumph. Matchless tried to keep the G12 alive with minor updates, but by the mid-60s, the writing was on the wall. The company would eventually fade out, taking the G12 down with it. Today, the 1961 Matchless G12 is a nostalgic piece of British motorcycling history, charming in its own stubborn way. But if you ever plan on owning one, just remember, it's not maintenance, it's a lifestyle. Next up, we've got a motorcycle that was all about affordable fun, until it turned into a relic of the 60s. Meet the 1968 Sears Allstate SR250, a bike that was all about offering riders a taste of the open road without breaking the bank. But did it live up to the hype? Let's dive in. Say hello to the 1968 Sears Allstate SR250, a 250 CEC single-cylinder motorcycle that was manufactured by Puch, an Austrian brand known for building tough little bikes. But here's the twist. It was sold under the Sears brand, which wasn't exactly the first name that came to mind when you thought of motorcycles. Now, let's take a look at the specs. The SR250 was powered by a 250cc two-stroke engine, pushing out about 18 horsepower. That wasn't a ton of power, but it was enough to get the job done, especially for the riders it was intended for. Young, budget-conscious folks looking for a simple, no-frills ride. It could top out at around 75 miles per hour, making it a reasonable choice for city commutes or weekend cruising. But here's the thing. While the SR250 might have sounded good on paper, it had its quirks. The two-stroke engine offered plenty of zip, but the oil mixing could get messy, and like many smaller bikes of the time, it had a tendency to need constant care. Add in some basic suspension and a somewhat creaky feel to the ride, and you had a bike that was functional, but far from refined. And then there were the looks. Let's be honest, the SR250 didn't win any design awards. It had a basic functional look with a simple round headlamp and a modest tank design. The chrome details were there, but it didn't have the flash of other motorcycles from the era. It was designed to be practical, not flashy, and it showed. Where the SR250 really fell behind, however, was in the competition. By the late 60s, Japanese manufacturers like Honda and Yamaha were already dominating the market with faster, lighter, and more reliable bikes. The SR250's performance and design were beginning to look dated compared to the newer, more modern offerings flooding the market. Sears tried to keep the SR250 alive with small updates, but the writing was on the wall. By the early 70s, the motorcycle market was moving fast, and the SR250 couldn't keep up. The bike quietly faded into history, along with the brand that once sold it. Today, the 1968 Sears Allstate SR250 is a curiosity, a small-time classic that's mostly remembered by collectors and vintage enthusiasts. If you ever come across one, just remember, owning one is a little bit like owning a time machine, a glimpse into a simpler, if not entirely smooth, era of motorcycling. Next on the list is a bike that didn't just roll onto the scene. It announced itself with a high-pitched scream and left the old guard wondering what just passed them. Say hello to the 1964 Yamaha YDS3, a 250cc two-stroke twin that helped put Japan on the motorcycling map for good. At a time when British bikes were leaking oil and American bikes were built like tanks, the YDS3 came in fast, clean, and clever. Let's talk specs. The YDS3 packed a 246 cubic centimeter air-cooled parallel twin that cranked out around 28 horsepower. For a bike its size, that was serious punch. It could hit 90 miles per hour with the right tailwind, and thanks to its low weight and sharp gearing, it felt quicker than bikes twice its size. But here's where Yamaha really flexed: the autolube system. Instead of pre-mixing oil with fuel like every other two-stroke at the time, the YDS3 had a built-in oil injection system. That meant no more gas station guesswork and fewer chances of frying your engine. It was high-tech magic, wrapped in a commuter's budget. Handling: tight. The bike had a double cradle frame and decent suspension for the era, which made it surprisingly nimble in corners. And the 5-speed gearbox? That gave riders more flexibility than most of the competition, which were still rocking 4 speeds, or worse, 3. Now for the vibes, literally and figuratively. Unlike some of its buzzier two-stroke cousins, the YDS3 was smooth. It didn't rattle your bones or leave your hands numb. It just got up and went. Clean, efficient, and just the right amount of attitude, and it looked the part too. The YDS3 had sleek lines, twin exhaust pipes that screamed speed, and just enough chrome to make it pop without going full Vegas. It wasn't flashy, it was focused. A bike that looked like it meant business. Because it did. So what was the catch? Honestly, not much. That's what made the YDS3 so disruptive. It didn't leak, didn't shake itself apart, and didn't need constant wrenching. While the Brits were patching up oil leaks and the Americans were wrestling heavyweight monsters, the YDS3 just worked. Today, the 1964 Yamaha YDS3 is remembered as a pioneer, a lightweight legend that proved Japanese bikes weren't just here to stay, they were here to win. If you ever get your hands on one, know this: you're not just riding a motorcycle, you're riding the moment the game changed. The 1969 CZ350 came straight out of Czechoslovakia with one goal in mind: rip through dirt like a beast and look rugged while doing it. Say hello to the CZ350, a no-nonsense two-stroke machine built by Cheesy, Česká Zbrojovka. The same folks who made firearms before deciding motorcycles were just as fun to shoot off. And in the world of motocross, this bike was lethal. Let's dig into the numbers. The CZ350 was powered by a 343 cubic centimeter two-stroke single-cylinder engine, putting out roughly 32 horsepower, depending on how close you were to sea level and how brave you were with the throttle. It could hit speeds near 80 miles per hour. But really, this bike wasn't built for highways. It was built for mud, ruts, and full-send jumps. The magic wasn't just in the engine, it was in the attitude. The CZ350 had lightweight construction, strong suspension, and just enough frame flex to give you control without snapping your spine. And the clutch? Tough as nails. Riders could drop the hammer and launch off the line while the competition was still trying to find neutral. Handling: brutal, but effective. It wasn't polished, it wasn't pretty. But if you had the guts, the CZ350 would reward you with one of the most raw, connected rides you could get in the late 60s. Looks? Let's call it purpose-built. This thing was not winning beauty contests. It had a tall seat, a skinny tank, and just enough metal to hold itself together. But in the motocross pits, this bike wasn't there to look pretty. It was there to win. And win it did. CZ bikes dominated races across Europe and even gave Japanese brands a serious run for their money before Yamaha and Suzuki took over in the 70s. And let's not ignore the CZ reputation: reliable, tough, and cheap to maintain. In a world where racing meant replacing parts weekly, the CZ350 could take a beating and ask for more. It was the motocross equivalent of that scrappy kid who doesn't talk much but always wins the fight. Today, the 1969 CZ350 is a cult classic. Not just because of what it was, but because of what it represented. It was a working-class hero that proved you didn't need glitz to go fast. All you needed was guts, a little premix, and a throttle hand with no fear. Next on the list is a motorcycle that wore a badge full of American pride. But under the tank, it had a bit of a British accent. Say hello to the 1962 Indian Patrol Car, a police-style bike that looked like it should be chasing down outlaws, but was actually sipping tea with a Royal Enfield engine. Yeah, this one's got layers. So here's the deal. By the early 60s, the original Indian motorcycle company was long gone. The brand had been sold off and revived, sort of, by rebadging British bikes and slapping the Indian name on them. One of those rebadges? The Indian Patrol Car built on a Royal Enfield chassis and engine. Let's get into the specs. The Patrol Car was powered by a 736 cubic centimeter parallel twin, straight from the Royal Enfield Chief model. It pushed out around 40 horsepower, which was respectable for the time. Top speed? Just shy of 90 miles per hour, if you weren't dragging a sidecar or loaded down with police gear. And yes, this thing was marketed toward law enforcement. It came with a sidecar option, a beefy frame, and a look that said, "I write tickets, not poems." But the reality? It rode more like a slightly overwhelmed British touring bike, solid, but not exactly built for high-speed chases. The handling was, well, predictable, if we're being kind. The suspension was stiff, the brakes were passable, and with the added weight of a sidecar, things could get a little wobbly in tight corners. But hey, it looked official enough to turn heads, and that was half the battle. Looks-wise, it had that classic patrol vibe: big fenders, solo saddle, and lots of metal. Throw in some chrome, a windscreen, and a police badge, and you've got yourself a bike that looked like it came straight out of a noir film. But here's the kicker. Under all that American branding was a thoroughly British motorcycle, and not everyone loved that. Traditional Indian fans felt a little betrayed. British bike fans weren't too sure what to make of the badge swap. It was kind of like ordering a burger and getting fish and chips. Not bad, just confusing. Today, the 1962 Indian Patrol Car is a quirky slice of motorcycling history. It's part police bike, part Royal Enfield, and part brand experiment that didn't totally stick the landing. But for collectors, it's a rare oddball that tells a story no Harley ever could. So if you ever spot one parked at a vintage rally, salute it. Not for its speed or performance, but for keeping the Indian name alive, even if it had to borrow a passport to do it.